Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's American dream is apparently officially over. Yes, oh yes, the couple.
Behind the closed doors of their California home, Meghan and Harry were reportedly discussing something neither the palace nor the public had expected. What began as a private conversation about Britain soon became a far more dangerous question. Was Meghan quietly preparing to return? For Harry, Britain had never completely disappeared. He had built a new life thousands of miles away, defended that decision with fierce emotion, and insisted that leaving was necessary to protect his family. Yet the past remained close. His father, his brother, his childhood, and the royal identity he had spent years trying to escape continued, pulling at him. The more he tried to move forward, the more unfinished business seemed to follow. Meghan approached the subject differently. She understood that even mentioning a return could reopen every accusation, every humiliation, and every painful question surrounding their departure. Britain was not simply another destination. It was the place where her public image had been created, challenged, and torn apart. Going back could offer reconciliation, but it could also place her inside the same system she believed had failed to protect her. That was why the conversations became serious. They were not passing remarks made during moments of nostalgia. They returned again and again to security, timing, family meetings, public reaction, and the consequences of Meghan stepping onto British soil beside Harry. Every possibility created another risk. Would they travel together? Would the children be involved? Would the palace welcome them privately while keeping them invisible publicly? Harry appeared to see a return as something deeply personal. Britain held the missing pieces of an identity fractured between prince, husband, father, and outsider. Part of him seemed to believe that going back could repair what leaving had broken. Meghan, however, was more guarded. She questioned whether the invitation to return would represent genuine peace or a carefully disguised trap designed to place the palace back in control. Soon, the discussion moved beyond the idea of a short visit. Their presence in Britain would carry a message. It could suggest forgiveness, renewed influence, or even the beginning of a new relationship with the monarchy. And symbolism inside royal life was never harmless. Then the first whisper escaped. Someone close to the royal household reportedly learned that the couple were considering Britain before Harry was ready to explain what those talks truly meant. From that moment, the balance shifted. The question was no longer whether Meghan might return. It was who would decide the conditions, the access, and the story the public would eventually be told. And as those private conversations grew more serious, a carefully protected secret began moving beyond California, reaching the one place where Meghan's return could never be treated as a simple family matter. The palace did not receive an official request, a formal letter, or even a direct warning. It received something far more unsettling, a whisper that Meghan and Harry were discussing Britain again, forcing senior royals to prepare for a return that had not yet been announced. The information reportedly arrived through indirect channels, carried quietly between people who understood that even an unconfirmed possibility could unsettle the royal household. No one could say exactly how far the discussions had gone. That uncertainty made the situation more dangerous. Were Meghan and Harry speaking out of emotion, testing the palace's reaction, or already shaping a plan behind closed doors? Senior courtiers began studying Harry's recent public remarks with new intensity. Every reference to family, home, reconciliation, or unfinished business was examined for hidden meaning. Words that had once sounded personal now seemed capable of carrying a warning. Britain might no longer be only a painful memory. It might be becoming part of the couple's future again. Inside the palace, the concern was immediate. Meghan's arrival could dominate headlines before she attended a single meeting. Official duties, royal announcements, and carefully planned appearances could disappear beneath renewed questions about accusations, betrayal, and the family feud. Her return would not be treated as private. It would become an event the monarchy could not fully control. For King Charles, the dilemma cut deeply. Refusing contact could push Harry further away and harden a rupture that already carried years of pain. Yet welcoming Meghan openly could look like a restoration of influence after everything that had happened. Compassion and duty were pulling him in opposite directions. William was reportedly less willing to view the talks as sentimental. He suspected they might involve more than a short visit. If Meghan returned, would she expect private access, public recognition, or a place within important family occasions? The unanswered questions multiplied quickly. Palace officials quietly considered security arrangements, accommodation, ceremonial boundaries, public appearances, and access to protected royal spaces. But protocol required something Meghan and Harry had not provided: clarity. Without a formal request, the household had nothing to approve, reject, or negotiate. One cautious figure reportedly urged the family not to react too soon. Visible resistance, they warned, could strengthen Meghan's argument that the palace remained hostile before she had even arrived. That warning only deepened the fear. The palace's greatest concern was no longer Meghan entering Britain. It was what she might demand once the doors began to open. But while palace officials tried to predict Meghan's next move, Harry was facing a far more personal struggle, because the return being discussed in private carried a price he had not yet admitted to himself. Harry had spent years insisting that leaving Britain was necessary to protect his wife and children. Now, behind closed doors, he was considering the very return that could challenge everything he had said and force him to choose between the family he defended and the family he left behind. His anger toward the institution had never erased his attachment to the country. Britain still held the memories he could not separate from himself: his mother, the homes of his childhood, the discipline of military service, the public role that once gave him purpose, and the friendships that belonged to a life before everything fractured. He had escaped the pressure, but he had not escaped the pull. That was what troubled Meghan. She feared Harry was not moving toward reconciliation with a clear plan, but being drawn back by guilt, memory, and the hope that one meeting could repair years of damage. To her, longing was not proof that the palace had changed. It was proof that the wound remained open. Harry knew a return could not happen without guarantees. He wanted security that felt real, privacy that would be respected, and assurances that Meghan would not be humiliated, excluded, or treated as an inconvenience. Yet where Harry spoke in emotional terms, Meghan demanded boundaries. Who would they meet? Where would they stay? What would be public? What could be changed without warning? The most difficult question was whether Harry should go first. A solo visit might lower tensions and create space for private conversations. But Harry feared the image it would create. Returning without Meghan could immediately be presented as evidence that their marriage was under pressure, or that she had been pushed aside. Meghan faced the opposite danger. Returning beside him without firm conditions could place her back inside a system she believed had once controlled the narrative around her. She would be expected to trust the same people she believed had allowed suspicion to grow while remaining silent. Then the children entered the discussion. Their relationship with King Charles and the wider royal family carried emotional weight Harry could not ignore. He may have believed their presence could soften old hostility and remind everyone what had been lost. Meghan, however, questioned whether that bond might be used as leverage, turning a family reunion into pressure they could not easily resist. By then, they were no longer discussing flights, dates, or a simple visit. They were negotiating what their marriage represented, how much independence they were willing to protect, and whether their royal connection could be reopened without consuming them again. Yet the deeper Harry and Meghan moved into those negotiations, the clearer it became that one unresolved issue stood above all others, and it was powerful enough to determine whether Meghan's return happened at all. Meghan was not prepared to return to Britain simply because Harry missed home. According to the growing speculation, she wanted protection from humiliation, certainty over her position, and one crucial assurance the palace might never willingly give, because accepting it could rewrite the balance of royal power. For Meghan, an unstructured return carried too many dangers. The palace could control where she sat, which doors opened to her, who appeared beside her, and which moments reached the public. A last-minute schedule change could alter the entire meaning of the visit. One carefully chosen photograph could suggest acceptance, while another could make her look isolated. Inside royal life, even silence could be arranged. That was why she reportedly wanted the purpose of the trip settled before any travel plans were made. Was this a private family reunion, a public act of reconciliation, or a ceremonial appearance with strict limits? Meghan did not want to arrive under one understanding, only to discover that the palace had written a different story. Her greatest fear was being welcomed in private, but erased in public. The monarchy could claim that bridges had been rebuilt while keeping her away from the moments that carried real symbolic weight. She wanted to know whether she would meet Charles, William, Catherine, and the other senior royals, or whether she would be kept close enough to serve the palace narrative but distant enough to remain powerless. There were also concerns about last-minute changes. Meghan allegedly wanted protection against being moved, separated from Harry, or quietly excluded from an important appearance after arriving. To her, those were not minor details. They were the language through which the institution decided who mattered. Harry understood why she was cautious. He had seen how quickly royal arrangements could become public judgments. But frustration began to grow. The guarantees Meghan wanted were exactly the kind the palace would resist giving in advance. The monarchy did not like being bound by promises, especially by someone no longer working within its structure. Meghan, however, was unwilling to return merely to stand silently at the edge of an event, while others controlled the meaning of her presence. Her resistance was shaped by old wounds, feelings of exclusion, disputed briefings, ceremonial limits, and private exchanges that later became public controversy. Palace officials saw the matter differently. To them, her conditions looked less like protection and more like a demand for influence. William reportedly believed no returning family member could dictate royal protocol. Charles was more sympathetic, but even he feared that formal concessions could weaken the crown and establish a precedent others might later exploit. By then, it was becoming clear that Meghan was not negotiating the details of a visit. She and Harry were exploring something far larger. Then the real purpose of the discussions finally began to emerge, answering the questions surrounding Meghan's possible return, but opening an even more explosive mystery about what she and Harry truly wanted from the crown. Meghan's possible return was not being discussed as a sentimental homecoming, a ceremonial appearance, or a simple attempt to end the feud. The private talks pointed towards something much larger, a controlled re-entry into royal life, without surrendering the independence she and Harry had fought to build. The truth behind the conversations was finally becoming clear. Meghan and Harry were not seriously discussing a permanent move back to Britain. They were allegedly exploring something far more complicated. A limited, carefully negotiated return that could restore family access, royal recognition, and public relevance, while allowing them to keep their main life outside palace control. For Meghan, that possibility carried enormous value. A small number of carefully chosen appearances could transform the story surrounding her. She would no longer look like a figure permanently pushed beyond the royal gates. She could return as someone still connected to the family, still important to the monarchy's global image, and still capable of shaping how her departure was remembered. Harry's hopes were more emotional. He believed a visible reunion with King Charles might repair part of the damage created by years of accusations, interviews, and painful silence. He also wanted his children to understand their royal heritage through more than titles and distant stories. Yet neither parent wanted them absorbed into the same institution they had fought to escape. Meghan reportedly saw the return as a chance to prove that she had not been defeated, silenced, or erased from royal history. But that was exactly what alarmed the palace. A partial return could give the couple legitimacy, access, and ceremonial importance without forcing them to accept the restrictions placed on working royals. To senior advisors, it looked dangerously close to the old half-in, half-out arrangement returning under a new name. The language might be softer, the terms might be more private, but the conflict at its heart remained unchanged. William reportedly viewed the idea as impossible. Every appearance would raise questions. Were Meghan and Harry representing the crown or themselves? Were their titles official tools or personal assets? Would private remarks later become public? Even a family photograph could create uncertainty about their true position. Charles faced a more painful calculation. Rejecting the plan could drive Harry and his children further away. Accepting it could reopen a structure the monarchy had already refused. Even Meghan and Harry disagreed over compromise. Harry placed family contact first. Meghan feared that without control over the narrative, reconciliation could become another carefully managed humiliation. Their possible return was therefore about far more than peace. It involved status, influence, reputation, legacy, and Meghan's permanent place in royal history. But any secret agreement could collapse the moment it reached the press, and someone inside the palace was already moving to ensure it never reached Charles intact. The truth had finally surfaced. Meghan was not simply considering a visit, but a new relationship with the monarchy, and inside the palace, one powerful figure was determined to prevent that possibility from taking shape. William had remained silent through years of interviews, accusations, private disclosures, and public attacks. But the possibility of Meghan returning under negotiated conditions forced him to confront a decision that could shape his future reign. And this time, silence was no longer enough. To William, the proposed arrangement was not a path toward healing. It was a risk the monarchy had already taken once, and paid for heavily. Renewed access without full accountability could reopen every wound the palace had struggled to contain. He did not fear a single visit. He feared what might follow after the gates opened. At the center of his resistance was one brutal question: could anything said in private remain private? Family conversations had already become interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and public accusations. William reportedly believed that no security plan, ceremonial schedule, or written agreement could solve that problem. The real obstacle was trust, and trust had not been restored. For that reason, he allegedly opposed any proposal that offered Meghan and Harry a formal role, guaranteed visibility, or a palace platform. The monarchy had spent years rebuilding stability after their departure. Public duties had been reassigned, expectations had changed, and a new working order had slowly taken shape. William feared that bringing the couple back under special conditions would throw the institution into another cycle of confusion and conflict. Charles saw the danger too, but his position was more emotional. He was not only a king protecting the crown, he was a father who understood that another rejection might push Harry beyond reach. That difference placed father and son on opposite sides of the same painful question. Catherine remained an unspoken presence in the dispute. Any return by Meghan would immediately revive scrutiny of their fractured relationship, dragging old claims and private tensions back into public debate. William reportedly wanted Harry to rebuild trust quietly before Meghan was included in major royal settings. Harry saw that condition as something far darker. To him, it looked like an attempt to separate husband from wife and force him to prove loyalty to his blood family by leaving Meghan outside. Meghan reached an equally harsh conclusion. William's resistance proved that the palace had never intended to offer genuine reconciliation. William may also have warned Charles that one concession would not remain one concession. Access could lead to questions about titles, a family visit could lead to security demands. A private welcome could become pressure for residences, ceremonial recognition, and an undefined royal position. Charles was now trapped between two sons, one preparing to inherit the institution, and the other still standing painfully beyond it. Whatever he chose would be remembered as either protection or betrayal. With William refusing to soften and Harry unwilling to abandon Meghan's conditions, the dispute moved toward the one person capable of approving the return, or ending it before a single royal door could open. For King Charles, the question was no longer whether he loved his younger son. It was whether that love could survive the demands of the crown. One decision might bring Harry closer, but it could also divide the palace, weaken William, and hand Meghan unprecedented power. Behind the authority of the throne was a father carrying a private grief he could not publicly explain. His relationship with Harry had narrowed into distance, guarded messages, and unfinished conversations. His contact with the Sussex children remained limited, leaving Charles painfully aware that time was moving faster than reconciliation. Some separations could be repaired. Others, if allowed to harden for too long, became permanent. That knowledge pushed him toward compassion. Yet every generous gesture carried political danger. An open invitation could be presented as surrender, suggesting that years of public conflict had forced the king to retreat. A firm refusal, however, could confirm Harry's darkest belief that the institution would always protect its image before protecting the family inside it. Palace advisors reportedly placed several choices before Charles. Meghan and Harry could be offered a private visit with no public appearances. Harry could attend a limited family meeting alone. The couple might be allowed at a ceremonial occasion without receiving official duties. Or the entire question could be postponed until trust had been rebuilt. None of the options was safe. A private invitation to Harry appeared to offer the least disruptive path. Charles could see his son without immediately redefining Meghan's royal position. But Harry refused to accept any arrangement that treated his wife as the problem to be managed. He had spent years defending their unity. Returning alone under palace conditions could look like a silent admission that Meghan was unwelcome. Meghan reportedly viewed the proposal with equal suspicion. To her, inviting Harry without guaranteeing her place was not compromise. It was division disguised as reconciliation. Then came the question of the children. Their presence could soften the encounter, but it would also intensify the emotional pressure on Charles. A grandfather meeting them after prolonged distance could hardly keep the moment detached from the larger dispute. Charles attempted to shape a response that sounded warm without promising status, influence, ceremonial access, or public recognition. But the careful language satisfied no one. William believed it offered too much. Harry believed it offered almost nothing. Meghan saw deliberate ambiguity designed to preserve palace control. The return remained possible, but only barely. Every condition depended on trust that did not exist, language that could be interpreted in opposing ways, and secrecy that was already beginning to fail. And when fragments of the secret negotiations finally began to escape the palace, Meghan and Harry faced the most dangerous stage of all, watching their private hopes become a public battle, before any decision had been secured. By the time rumors of Meghan's return reached the public, the story had already become larger than a family reunion. It was now a test of loyalty, power, forgiveness, and survival, and every possible outcome threatened to leave one side believing it had been betrayed. What had begun as private discussions was suddenly a global argument. Supporters claimed reconciliation could prove the monarchy was capable of change, compassion, and maturity. They saw Meghan's return as a chance to end years of bitterness and show that even the deepest royal wounds could be faced. Critics saw something very different. To them, Meghan and Harry wanted the prestige of royal connection without the discipline, silence, and responsibility demanded by the crown. Meghan understood that no part of the visit would be considered ordinary. Every photograph would be examined. Every greeting would be measured. Seating arrangements, clothing, distance, body language, and even moments of silence could become evidence of acceptance or rejection. One cold exchange could destroy the entire message of reconciliation. One carefully managed appearance could hide the fact that nothing underneath had truly changed. Harry began to face an even harder truth. The visit could succeed publicly and still fail emotionally. Applause, headlines, and formal politeness would mean little if his family remained guarded around Meghan. He could bring her back to Britain, but he could not force trust into a room where suspicion had settled for years. William's resistance made the future more dangerous. If trust was not rebuilt before he became king, the barrier could become permanent. Charles knew this too. He feared that delaying reconciliation might push the conflict beyond his reign, leaving his sons to inherit not only the monarchy but the bitterness surrounding it. For Meghan, the final decision depended on one question. Would she return as an acknowledged member of the family, or as a tolerated outsider whose presence was tightly controlled? She could still refuse to travel, leaving Harry to face Britain alone and triggering fresh questions about their unity. Or she could arrive beside him, forcing the palace to confront every unresolved wound in full public view. Yet the greatest danger was not an argument, a refusal, or an obvious humiliation. It was royal silence, polite, controlled, and carefully managed. A silence that made peace appear possible while changing nothing beneath the surface. The private talks had answered one question. Meghan was considering a limited, strategic return. But they created larger ones about trust, influence, status, and the future of the crown. Britain might be ready to see her again. The palace, however, might never be ready to accept what her return would represent. Because Meghan's journey back to Britain, if it happens, will not begin at an airport or behind palace gates. It will begin with a decision made in private, where love, resentment, ambition, and royal survival are still fighting for control.